Oh, okay.
They can
Fair
kind
enough.
of hear better.
There, is that better?
Very good.
Sound good?
Everybody hear me okay? It's not too loud? Okay. Well, thank you, Andy, and I'm really excited to be here. I was really excited when Andy uh, told me about this opportunity. I've presented to Native Plant Society before, and it's one of my favorite groups because these folks, y'all are always passionate and interested and just generally fun to talk to. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about photographing biodiversity. Really, I'll talk a little bit about some tips, tricks, some technical info on that.
Yeah. And then get that out of the way.
Perfect.
Okay. So the button or the wheel?
Thank you. But really, mostly this is just going to be a chance for me to talk about biodiversity because I really like to nerd out on biodiversity. Here on this title slide, I'll just go through some of the species we see here. Starting from the left, we've got everybody's favorite, the painted bunting, one of our most showiest birds, native to North America. Pretty common where we're at here and all throughout most of Texas. You can find these guys pretty commonly in the summer. Moving to the right, that bird is a strange-tailed tyrant. That's a bird that's native to high-quality grasslands in Argentina, parts of Brazil, Paraguay. It's a really cool bird, and they're really fun to see out there. Sort of like our scissor-tailed flycatcher, is just a little bit more showy, in my opinion. If you go just below him, that's a spotted salamander, maybe my all-time favorite animal. It's a ambistomatid salamander. So if you guys are familiar with tiger salamanders, it's in the same genus as a tiger salamander. These guys are native to woodlands in the eastern US and southeastern Canada, and they do occur in Texas. They come into I would say about 100 miles or so into Texas. We have these guys in the Pineywoods. Moving next to the spotted salamander, you see a showy milkweed. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, Asclepias speciosa. That is an image from Texas. These do grow natively in Texas and a few spots in the panhandle. There's a few spots in the eastern panhandle and the western panhandle where these grow in kind of mucky drainages, seepy drainages near the headwaters of streams, things like that. Next to that milkweed, that's a Raffinesque's big-eared bat. That's a really cool bat species that historically primarily roosted in large hollow trees and bottomland hardwood forests. We do have these guys in East Texas as well in the Pineywoods. That particular image was taken there's an old ghost town called Dextra near Nacogdoches in Nacogdoches County in the Pineywoods. And what these guys will do is if you have good habitat around it, they'll actually take up residence in abandoned buildings. This one's actually in an abandoned church. There's a large maternity colony of these Raffinesque big-eared bats out there. And of course, you got the Texas tortoise up there, really cool. We're not too far from the range where we're standing right here. You don't have to go too far south to start seeing those guys. Below that's an orchid not native to Texas. That's Calypso bulbosa. Fairy slippers, I think, is the common name. Those grow in sort of boreal northwood forests, but then they also start to come down into montane forests and like the Rockies. You can start picking them up there. So that's from New Mexico. Probably about as close as we get to that species. I just think it's so cool to see. Then we've got a big wapiti or an elk bull down there at the bottom. And we've got next to that, Dicalus purpuratus is a ground beetle. We have them here. We have them all throughout kind of the eastern half of Texas. And it's just some of these insects, I mean, they're not very big, but when you see them up close, they're just stunningly beautiful. And that's one of the things I like about photographing biodiversity is that through a camera, we can see things sometimes better than we see with our naked eye and really appreciate their beauty. A little bit about me. I'm just a lifelong naturalist. I mean, from before I can remember, my parents said that I was turning over rocks and things like that, looking for bugs or whatever I could find. I remember growing up, the highlights of my childhood were these long camping trips that I took with my family out to all the national parks in the Western US, Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain, Grand Canyon, and just seeing all the nature out there and seeing all the wildlife and stuff like that really played a big part in kind of shaping me and shaping my passions. So it's kind of what I pursued. I have an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree from Stephen F. Austin State University there in Nacogdoches. For my master's, I actually got to live in Argentina for a year. I studied the bird communities in Iguazu National Park. So Iguazu has one of the largest waterfalls in the world, spectacular place to be. I got to live in a research station there in the middle of the jungle. That's where I met my wife, and she's here in the library with our little one playing. They're out in the library, but so I was really fortunate to get to do that. And then I've worked as a biologist for universities, nonprofits, state government, federal government, and most recently for private. But for the last 20 so years, I've just been enamored with photography. And to me, it's always nice to go out and take a hike, but if I don't have my camera, I don't feel like I'm really fully in the experience, just because I'm always thinking, oh, I wish I could take a picture of that. I wish I could take a picture of that. So really for me, photography and being in nature, the two things I love most in the world, they just, besides my family, of course, they just kind of go hand in hand for me. And and really it's led me, I've been fortunate that I've been able to kind of build up a side business, if you will, and I sell images to magazines and I write articles as well. And sell articles and images to magazines. I've been a consultant on some natural history films and things like that. So it's just really great when your passions get to trickle over into your career. And I worked a couple of years on a alligator project there in East Texas. We were looking at American alligator inland population, so the ones away from the coast, kind of up near Tyler area. And then if you guys know where Danby or Steinhagen Reservoir is there, kind of Jasper County, we were looking at some of the alligator populations there. So what we would do, we would catch them, we would take measurements, get all that kind of stuff. We would tag them. We would take a sample just to get some DNA, things like that. We were also looking at like bioaccumulation of pollutants. And then we would take stomach samples, which was kind of fun. We put basically just put a big PVC pipe in their mouth and pump their stomachs. And at this particular site, there's a rookery. So there's a heronry. So there's like cattle egrets and little blue herons and some other stuff would nest there. And there'd always be a few alligators that hung out under there. And we caught one. And it was just like, it was probably 2 or 3 dozen pairs of legs. Like they're just gobbling up all the little heron chicks that were falling out of the nest. So I am a little bit of a gear junkie. I like to talk gear, but I don't have the most recent gear just because everything I have serves me well and new gear is expensive. But what I have up here was top of the line at one point in time. So I still shoot like a digital single lens reflex camera, DSLRs. Right now, really mirrorless cameras dominate the market. Pretty much anyone getting into photography now is going to use a mirrorless camera. It's still a digital camera. It still works similar, but there are some key differences. But mine, so I had a Canon 7D Mark II, which is it's a crop frame, and then a Canon 5D Mark IV is a full frame camera. And then my lenses, most of the images you're going to see in this presentation were taken with a 100mm macro lens, which gets you 1-to-1, like life size. You can get focus really closely and you can take images of really small things. And then my 500mm, which lets me get close to things that are not easy to get close to. So birds and things you shouldn't get close to, like bears or elk during the rut, stuff like that. Some of my other favorite gear, the 1.4 extender is nice because that gives you a little extra reach. I also use flash sometimes. I'll use natural light if I can, but sometimes I really need to use flash. So I have a couple of flashes and some nice big soft boxes to diffuse that flashlight to make it look a little bit more natural. The transmitter that you see on there, it's actually lets me wirelessly trigger my flashes. So if I can put my flashes somewhere off the camera, that'll transmit to them. And when I take an image, it'll shoot flash. So I can get different angles of light and stuff like that using that. I say tripod monopod for wildlife. I really like monopods. If you're not familiar, like you've probably seen a big tripod with 3 legs. It's really cumbersome, and like as wildlife moves, it's hard to move. But a monopod with 1 leg, you can move that side to side, up and down, pick it up, and you can still stabilize it and get a little bit of extra stability there. Circular polarizing filters. If you're into landscape photography, I highly recommend you have one of these in your bag. That just helps you cut down glare on light. It's really good for photographing things like leaves, the green leaves that reflect a lot of light. You have that polarizing filter, you won't get so much light reflect back at you, or water. It helps to cut down on the reflection of water and stuff like that. And then software, I mean, taking the pictures, the big part of it, but their editing software is really, really helpful, especially today. You can do really crazy things with editing software. So, and I don't mean like make the image look like it shouldn't look. I just mean in terms of reducing noise, increasing the quality of the image and stuff like that. Or if you say, let's say you blew the shot, you know, you had your settings all wrong and it blew out all the highlights, or you really don't have detail in the shadows, you can really pull a lot of detail back with things like Lightroom. And then I use Adobe Photoshop to kind of touch up at the end, just to make sure all the colors look natural, because the camera, you know, the camera tries to interpret things, and it presents its own color scheme to whatever image you take, but it's not quite as fine-tuned as our eyes. So I still like to try to tweak it a little bit to make it look more like what I saw in the field. And then if you're into photography and you carry a lot of gear, this bag down here, the Mindshift Backlight 36 liter is awesome. All this stuff fits in there, and it has a big pouch. It has 2 water pouches, which that's hard to find sometime in camera bags. So I can carry like 2 big quart Nalgene bottles, and then I can fit in like extra clothes or lunch or whatever, my knife and first aid kit. So it's a great bag. Just I don't get paid by Mindshift, but I highly recommend. So what is biodiversity? I know, I'm sure everyone in here is familiar with the concept, but besides just being the spice of life or happiness for me, it's all the species of plants, animals, fungi, single-celled organisms, basically every living thing in a particular area. And it applies at different scales. So you can have global biodiversity, or you can have biodiversity in a particular plant community or a smaller area. So it's kind of, you're talking biodiversity, you can be talking many different scales. And then you'll also hear like you can have floral diversity, plant diversity. You're talking specifically about the diversity of plants, or faunal diversity, the diversity of animals, that kind of thing. And why is it important? Well, all ecosystems are connected. So just because, you know, you might not be living in the Pineywoods, or the Pineywoods, you know, we might not be living here. Things that happen across different vegetative communities, ecosystems, even on large scales, things that happen in completely other parts of the world have the potential to affect us as people, but also to affect our natural communities and things like that as well. So everything's connected. You can't, nowhere on planet Earth is living in a vacuum. Things that you do in one place will have repercussions in other places. Plus, we depend on plants and animals for food. Pollinators, I mean, huge bees pollinate. And, you know, we talk about honeybees, but even our native bees pollinate massive amounts of crops. Honeybees, they don't really like blueberries, for example. Blueberry flowers, not high on a honeybee's list, but there are native bees that really like blueberries. And so those native bees are pollinating the vast majority of our blueberry crops that we grow here in our country. And so there's other species that honeybees can't physically pollinate, but our big bumblebees and things like that can, through something called buzz pollination. Their wings are so powerful they can force pollen into the flower, and they can pollinate that way. We depend on them for shelter. We use animal products for our shelter. We use plant products for our shelter, for medicines, income. I mean, Andy and I make our incomes because there are native plants and animals out there. They also have cultural significance. A lot of our native cultures around the world revere different animal species, or utilize different animal species for different purposes, sometimes ceremonial, sometimes for their shelters, things like that. But it also, to me, it has intrinsic value. I think it's kind of not appropriate that humans only look at things through the lens of what does it do for me. These things have existed long before we did, in some cases. I don't feel like we have any kind of a right to be able to place a value or lack thereof on natural things. So to me, they have an intrinsic value, and I really think that we need to recognize that. So kind of the first thing, and kind of what started it for me, is finding inspiration to actually get out there and start photographing. And today, social media is a big one, but I will warn people that AI, artificial intelligence now, unfortunately, like, it's kind of, I mean, I'm not a fan of it for various reasons, but in social media, it's so good now that it can essentially create an image you would never see in nature, but it looks like somebody took that picture. And people who don't know any better will see that and think that that's an actual picture that somebody took in the field. So that's just kind of I don't know, it's an unfortunate thing that comes with the progression of technology, I suppose. But social media can be good for finding inspiration. Sites like Instagram and stuff like that, there are a lot of really talented nature photographers on there. You can go through and see their work. A lot of times it'll direct you to their websites. You can browse it there. Books and magazines, this was it for me when I was a kid. So whenever we would take trips out west to the national parks, we'd always stop in like the little national park bookstore. And every time I'd get to pick out a book, and I'd always liked like the coffee table books that I didn't really read the word, read the pages as much as just look at the images. And I just remember really liking those images. And so as I got into photography, I tried to emulate some of those things with the images I took. I tried to remember what I saw, and I thought, how can I do this, or how can I do this better, or something like that. And something that you'll notice, and I don't know how many folks here are photographers or serious about it or whatever, but I remember when I first started seeing images, and I think that's like that's as good as it gets. I can't believe how good that image is. But as you progress as a photographer and get better, you can look back at the same images and think like, they just don't look as good because now I know more. Now I've taken more. Now I have a better idea of what I like to see and that sort of thing. Camera clubs. I imagine there's a local camera club here. We have camera clubs in Lufkin and Nacogdoches. That can be just a good place. One to a lot of times folks will go and they'll give a presentation of like their trip somewhere, something like that, and you can see the images. There's a lot of good feedback generated from those, just good like back and forth, learning opportunities. And a lot of times they go out in the field, like you just get a group kind of like, I mean, a lot of different groups will actually go out on these field trips, but you'll actually be out taking pictures and you can learn from people who've been doing it a long time and that sort of thing, or you just get to go out and have fun with other folks. And then nature itself, I mean, just going out and you're seeing a great flower, I mean, that can hopefully inspire you like, hey, I should take a picture of that. And then maybe you take a picture with your phone and then maybe you think, I can get a slightly better picture of that. Maybe I want one to put on my wall, and you can go out with a camera and all that kind of stuff. This is the Echinocereus pentalophus, the ladyfinger cactus that down in South Texas brush country has some really cool cactus species down there. And this is one of them. These just forms these big mats, and in the spring, they just bloom in mass, really, really spectacular. Now, before you actually get out and start taking pictures, of course, I don't want to say this applies all the time because sometimes it's nice just to go to a trail and take a walk with your camera and see what you see. But if you're interested in seeing particular things, or you want to you really want to see the species, photograph the species, it's always important to do your research so you should know where to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on some later slides. You know when you want to go, what time of year is best for it, what time of year is going to be best for what you want to see, or what time of year are you going to have the most opportunities to photograph biodiversity. So, if you're talking, so that image there, that's Lupinus savardii, Big Bend bluebonnets right in front of the Chisos Range in Big Bend National Park. That's taken off River Road. I knew to go there because, I mean, it was the blooming period, but this was in 2019. And I was just seeing all these reports of this sort of super bloom. They had just the right set of rain in the winter and early spring to set a bunch of stuff blooming. And so I knew that we had to go. And so we went. So kind of knowing that was the time to go. But if you're talking West Texas too, here, Hill Country in East Texas, a lot of times springtime, really best for seeing best diversity of wildflowers. But if you want to go out to West Texas, like and go into the Davis Mountains or something, nothing to me. July, absolute best time. July or August, when those monsoon rains hit in those mountains, the weather's cool, everything's green, there's tons of blooming plants. So it's just knowing those particular areas when you want to go is important. What to bring? I mean, this is kind of, this kind of applies to anything you do outside, I suppose, but you always want to be safe. You always want to make sure you've got plenty of water, especially in areas where water is limited. You got the right clothes, the right food, what have you. But where to stay can be a big one that folks don't always plan ahead. I've been in more than a few situations where I got excited and I was like, I just got to go. And when I get there, I'll figure it out. There'll be a hotel. Or no, all the hotels are set up. One time we went to West Texas to see a living rock cactus, if you know that one, Eriocarpus fissuratus. It's a spineless cactus, really pretty, blooms in the fall. Well, I was like, it's West Texas. Like, we'll find a camp spot up in Big Bend, or we'll find something. And so we get out there and there's nothing. And the only thing we find is in that little ghost town, or that little town, Study Butte. There's one little area where you can camp. It's like a mix, RV park camping, all that. So we get there, we camp there, but right next to it they were having some kind of like a concert party to like 1:30 a.m. and like just blasting it out. So if we had planned a little bit better, we probably could have been a little bit more comfortable that trip. So here's just an example of doing your research and how it can really pay off. So these are all images from Argentina. Last fall, we took our son on his first trip to meet his family in Argentina. And we took a couple of weeks down there, and I wanted to really get out, get to a cool place and take some pictures. There's an area down there called the Esteros de Ibera. It's the Ibera wetlands. It's the second largest wetland complex in South America. So it's kind of like the Pantanal, if you've heard of that. But it's really, really remote. Like you have to drive 70 miles down a really sketchy dirt road and you get to this really idyllic little town. But they've got only a few little eco lodges there. You know, it's something that you had to plan out in advance. And we did, we really prepared. And we also, you know, you could sometimes pay people to do this for you and you know, shell out $5,000 and they'll take care of everything. But I'd rather hold on to that $5,000 and then, you know, be able to figure it out ourselves. And we did. We put a lot of time into planning that trip and we got out there with everything we needed. We knew we would not be able to access a lot of creature comforts for several days. So we went there, we were stocked up and it was awesome. And that place is just full of wildlife. That's a marsh deer up there. It looks a little bit like a mule deer, but it's kind of a rare species of deer that's native to the wetlands in South America. The plains viscacha next to it, that the rodent there, it doesn't look like it, but it's big, nutria sized. A Maori stork, one of 3 native storks down there, really cool. Then you have one of my favorite birds, the giant wood rail below it there, extremely showy, extremely loud, sounds almost like a bell ringing. And then you have 2 pampas fox there playing. So we got to see a lot of really, really cool stuff. And I'm really glad that my wife and I put so much time into planning that trip. And then just kind of knowing where to be and when to be for things like peak fall foliage. This is up in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. Just knowing the time of year to go there and the places to go, what elevation is going to look best, all that kind of stuff. You'll get more out of your trips, I think, if you put a lot into planning that sort of thing. One really important thing when you're going out there and taking pictures is to know a little bit about your subject. And some of this ties into that previous sort of do your research kind of thing, but understanding the life history of your subject, understanding its behavior, observing its behavior while you're actually in the field can help you get some really cool pictures. Knowing where to find it, knowing when to find it to be able to photograph is all important. So those, you know, just for an example here, those pink lady slippers there, a beautiful orchid, I mean, big, tall orchid. They're kind of in the North Woods, they're going on to the Appalachians. Knowing when they're going to be blooming, knowing what types of habitat that you can find them in, all that kind of stuff is really, really important. So here's an example. So this is eastern bluebird, and for my money, one of our prettiest birds. This is a species that historically would have occurred in sort of prairie, savanna, you know, mosaics. It would occur where there's open country, but there's large trees still present for nesting, because they're cavity nesters. Species that declined really sharply when we started to see a lot of land use changes in the 1900s, but they really started bouncing back through the use of bluebird house trails. And so people just using these bluebird houses on their properties provided nesting refugia for them. And so this picture I tried to capture to make it look like it was in like it's a shortleaf pine stick there, it's a pine branch there. Sort of that would be like a species that might grow adjacent to some open areas. But to be able to capture that, all we did is that's the box of my buddy's property. We just set it up there, and whenever they'd come into the nest to check on the eggs, they'd stop there for a few minutes or a few seconds, and just enough to get a shot up. These are a couple of rare orchids that we do have in East Texas. So we've got the Kentucky lady slipper, largest member of the genus Cypripedium. They get to almost 1 meter tall, and the pouch or the slipper is about the size of an egg, like a medium-sized egg. Very cool plant. Then you have a world pogonia next to it. So these both occur in really specific habitats. The world pogonia occurs, like if you're familiar with a bagel or forested seep, it's kind of like a seepy area that's in the middle of acidic pine woods. And these guys like to be where you have kind of your upland slope and you have your seep. There's this real narrow band right between there where the soil doesn't get quite too wet, where these guys grow. And the lady slippers grow in these really like mature shaded canyons there in beach, typically dominated by beech or other hardwoods that we have in East Texas. But knowing when they bloom is important because they bloom around the same time every year, but there's a few things that contribute to it, right? If you have a slightly warmer winter, oftentimes they'll bloom a little bit earlier. But if you have a couple of cold snaps, they'll bloom a little bit later and that kind of stuff. And just paying attention to all that because these are so rare. I mean, especially that world begonia, I know of maybe 4 or 5 places where I can go take a picture of one in Texas. And if I miss that window by a few days, I'm not going to find any that have that right, that look just nice and fresh and really pretty. Same with those orchids. And some of those, it's a trick to get out to. I mean, some of those you're walking 2.5 miles up and down hills through the woods to get to. And as much as I love doing that, I try to time it right so I'll actually have what I'm looking there. Because if I get there and they're just in bud, then I'm like, oh, I need to come back here and do this again. 2 days. And then knowing where things occur is really important too, especially so this is a great example because these salamander species in the Appalachians, the Appalachian Mountains, salamander diversity hotspot, more species of salamanders there than anywhere else in the world by far. I mean, significantly higher diversity there. But a lot of the Appalachians are an ancient range, right? And they've weathered down. And so you have a lot of these species that have been isolated on these mountaintops for a very long time because that elevation used to be a lot higher and there was gene flow going between them. But as they eroded away, that habitat got pushed higher and higher up until it was only up at these little peaks. In the valleys, they're not good, it's not suitable habitat. So they've been isolated for so long that they've diverged into different species over millennia or millions of years in some cases. So some of these are just, you find them in a single mountaintop or a single mountain range. And so you have a red-legged, the one up in the left is a red-legged salamander, and the one down on the bottom right is a Jordan salamander, a red-cheeked salamander. Used to be considered the same species years and years ago until they started to come up with this concept that these guys have been isolated for a very long time and started to do some genetic work and found that there's actually quite a bit of divergence, split them into different species. And then up above the red-cheeked salamander, you have a Nantahala black-bellied salamander. Super cool species that actually lives in those really nice, clear, cold mountain streams. And then the red salamander is just the coolest. I mean, it's hard for me to believe those things exist when you actually see them. And they get big. I mean, they get, 7, 8 inches long, just super, super cool. Here's another example of a spotted salamander. And I'm blown away by how beautiful these things are, especially when you see them in your hand. It's crazy to think that something like that exists. And the crazier thing is, so back here in the Appalachians, salamanders make up more biomass than all the other vertebrates that are combined. So all the birds, fish, deer. Well, I don't know about fish. Hold off on that one because I don't know about it. We'll say all the terrestrial biomass. So birds, deer, bears, squirrels, et cetera, et cetera. There's more salamander biomass than all of that combined. Just crazy. And these guys, they're super hard to see, but they can be super abundant. And so the life history of the spotted salamander is that it spends 99.5% of the year underground. They live in small mammal burrows, crayfish burrows. They live downwards, cool and moist year round. Then in this part of the world, or in East Texas part of the world, kind of December, January, we start to get some of these rains that come through that are actually kind of warm rains. Even though that's kind of the start of our cold season, we start to get these rains where you get these warm front rains that come through, the temperature stays above 50 degrees, and it starts raining. And where these guys breed are in these little ephemeral, these little swale depressions in the middle of the woods that they call vernal pools, that they start to fill with water as plants go into dormancy. They're not sucking up a bunch of water. The water table rises, and then these winter rains fill up those pools. These guys come out. One single pool can have 500 to 1,000 of them breeding in it. They come out just in huge numbers. They migrate to those ponds. They'll be in there for a few days, in these big breeding congresses. Really cool to see. But then after that, they go back into their upland refugia, get down into those burrows, and you won't see them again. So you've got a period of 2 weeks to a month where you're really likely to see these guys. And so it's just always special when you do. But you have to watch the weather, you have to plan for it, you have to kind of know. And there's other things that go into it too, like if it hasn't rained a whole lot, then those vernal pools might not be full enough by the time those first rains come through. So you're looking at there's a whole lot of weird stuff, soil temperatures, cumulative rainfall, all that kind of stuff. So it can be tricky to plan. Then the other, I don't know if anyone's ever been fortunate enough to see an elk rut or a wapiti rut. This is in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. If you haven't gone, I mean, if it's hard to brave, you have to brave the crowds because a lot of people go that time of year. But mid-September to late September, there is just spectacular because you have the fall. It's cool. It's still hot here, but it's nice and cool there. The aspens are all turning really beautifully, and then these elk are having their rut, their annual rut. They're breeding basically. It's like a big breeding festival, you could say, where you have these bulls, they're running around and they're bugling and they're gathering these harems of females, but then all the other bulls are like trying to steal females from other harems, and it's just, you get into one of these and it's just absolutely crazy to see. And you'll see fight, like you can see this guy's been fighting. I mean, that's an injury that he sustained from another bull, but he's still in it. He's still coming back because their testosterone, their drive is just so insane because this is their only chance for the whole year to pass on their genes. And so they're singularly focused. These guys can lose 25% plus of their body mass because they don't eat, they don't sleep, they're just focusing on reproducing and then fighting off rivals. And so it's just super, super interesting to see. And there's certain areas of the park where people literally like just bring their lawn chairs and you just like line their lawn chairs up down the road and just watch them go. And it's something to see. This is bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis. This is a Texas native plant. That image was taken in Nacogdoches County. It's pretty rare in Texas, but it's super common in those eastern forests. But a couple of things to know about this one. One, it does bloom super early, like one of the first things to bloom in the woods. It's spring ephemeral. So it's trying to carry out all that period before all the trees develop leaves and shade the forest floor. It's wanting to flower, get through. So sometimes as early as late January, these guys open. More typically, kind of mid-February, they start to open. Typically by early March, they're done. But the other thing to know about these guys is they won't open like this unless it's really warm or sunny, because they want to try to maximize the exposure of those reproductive structures to pollinators. So if it's a cold, rainy day when the pollinators are not really likely to be out and about, they'll stay closed up. So you can't get an image like this unless you have just that right. It has to first be flowering, and then you have to have those right perfect weather conditions to get it. Then just here's a couple bees. So that there is a blueberry bee, the one on the redbud. They don't make it this far west, but East Texas, they are native in East Texas. And they're called blueberry bees because they do have a penchant for blueberries, but they really like redbud as well. And they'll forage. You might have heard like the term polylectic, oligolectic. They'll forage on other stuff, and like the females will collect. Well, the males will kind of get whatever, but the females are fairly selective on what they're collecting pollen from in this species. They really like blueberries. They really like redbuds. And then you've got a black-legged oil digger bee on Salvia farnacea. That's taken, I mean, I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. But if you like bees, that place is awesome. I mean, it's good for the plants, yes, but to see the bees almost year round. I mean, if there's a flower there, you'll probably find a cool native bee there any time of year. And so those guys are just really cool. They actually like those setae on the legs of the females are not just to carry. So they have their hind legs that carry pollen, but on their mid legs, they've got these other modified hairs that carry oil that they use to line their nests. And they get them from things like Cremeria lanceolata, trailing rhatany. Some of those plants produce a lot of oils, and these bees will just collect it. So pay attention to the light. And so I'm going to run through a whole bunch of images in this pretty quickly, but light can make the difference from a good photo and a great photo. If you go out and you take a picture of a flower or a bird at 12 o'clock on a fully sunny day, a lot of times you can get it perfectly sharp, but you'll have shadows, you'll have harsh light that doesn't really bring out the colors. So really paying attention to your light is one of the key fundamentals of going out and taking images. And so this is just a eastern collared lizard up in the Wichita Mountains. If you've never been to the Wichita Mountains, another place I highly recommend in central Oklahoma for wildlife, wildflowers, all kinds of cool stuff. But these guys are just gorgeous. So front light is kind of, this is like typically what most people go for. You have the sun at your back, the subject in front of you, it's getting illuminated by the sun. You guys might have heard like the golden hour, like an hour after sunrise to an hour before sunset. In my experience, in most cases, it's more like 30 minutes after and 30 minutes before. Really 15 minutes after and 15 minutes before are really the good light. After that, like it starts to deteriorate pretty quickly, except for in a few situations, which I'll go to here. But this one taken right at first light, this is a reddish egret. This is a white morph reddish egret taken down in Galveston. Here's another one. This is, so I apologize. I know you guys probably see deer, and deer probably a bit of a pest in your minds, but I love white-tailed deer. Especially the big bucks, because where I'm from, like you don't see them. You really don't. And they have a really cool life history too. And they undergo that rut. And if you think about it, these guys, so their ruts in November-ish, most of Texas. And it's just like the elk, like that's all that they're thinking about. These bucks are just running around. That's all that they're thinking about. And they're losing huge percentage of their body weight. And they're doing it all right before the leanest time of the year. So a lot of these bugs die, like in natural situations, they're going to die because of that. And the whole reason they do that at that time is because that allows the does to drop their fawns when you have the highest probability of really rich forage being on the ground. So that's why it's timed there, so that the fawns will be born with plenty to eat. So these bucks are like, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a conscious decision. It, I mean, it might be, right? Like I'm not so arrogant to think that I know what's going in the mind of these animals, right? Like who knows what they're thinking, but really, yeah. But it's really fascinating. Like that's a behavioral ecology that these species do that I just think is really cool. Plus, I think they are pretty. So this is one that just he popped out in front of the dark woods, and I like that. I like when you can have a light subject with a dark background behind it in these times of day. Here's one, yeah, Jim's and Wade or Sacred Datura. This is taken in Reeves County, West Texas, native plant. It's funny, there was one at our hotel, there's one of these, which not the, I don't know, you're inviting, these are highly hallucinogenic and sometimes highly dangerous but anyway, they're pretty, they really are cool, open at nighttime, pollinated by nocturnal things. Here's another example of a buck. This is just literally like the very, very first rays of light just starting coming through the trees, and you just got lucky and caught him. And then here's a ghost crab on the beach. Just kind of another example when it's nice, that light just looks nice. It's just like a nice pinky or orangey color. It starts to get really harsh when you start getting the sun higher. But some cases, so this was actually taken about 5 o'clock in May. So this is early. But what I found is if you're photographing things over water, especially if you're at a low angle, that water reflects a lot of the light back up onto the subject. So you get rid of some of those harsh shadows and the light actually looks a little bit softer. So if that's a pro tip, I guess, if you're into photographing birds over water, ducks, waterfall, anything like that, you actually get quite a bit more time if you're going over water. And then sometimes there's nothing you can do. So like this is an East Texas, really, really rich hardwood slope that's got all these things you see in like the Appalachian woods. It's got trout lily, it has toothwort, it has false rue anemone. It's got all these really cool spring ephemeral flowers. But a lot of these things don't open like the bloodroot until 10 o'clock sometimes. So sometimes you're just stuck with photographing when the light's not the greatest, and that shouldn't deter you, I think, because I think sometimes composition or an interesting subject can outweigh that harsh light a little bit. Backlight, not my favorite thing to shoot in, because for biodiversity specifically, like I like to show off the colors and the textures of the animal. backlight can make a really pretty interesting shot, and sometimes it can show kind of interesting details you don't see in front light, but I prefer front light, or my favorites are coming up, my favorite lighting conditions, but it can look really pretty in nice light. More deer. Pronghorn. Whoops, we missed it. Pronghorn, it's another ungulate, but it's not a deer. One of the coolest mammals in the country, as far as I'm concerned. That's from New Mexico. But sometimes what backlight can do is like not as much as the light on the subject, but the background, just like those, all that grass just got lit up with kind of that golden, that really nice golden color. It's fun for plants too. Sometimes the backlight will come through the petals because the petals are so thin that you can actually, petal sepals, you know, the flower itself, you can actually see some really cool hidden textures in the flowers. So Delphinium carolinianum from East Texas, and then that's Pinguicula planifolia, Chapman's butterwort. It's a carnivorous plant in Florida, but you can kind of see what it did to the water there, like those little, they call them bokeh balls. Like the bokeh is kind of the background of the image. It sort of does cool things when you backlit through water. Sidelight, not my favorite either. I don't have a lot of examples, but sometimes it can make kind of dramatic, neat looking things like that deer, you know, really what you see is kind of the antler shape. And then, you know, that cute little prairie dog. You got to see that there's a second one down there and peeking his little head up. Silhouetting is that, I mean, silhouetting is another, usually it's backlight, but not always. Sometimes it's you're just against like the sky or you're against something. It's a diving pelican. Again, it can be really effective, really like dramatic looking, but not necessarily the best for the purposes of photographing biodiversity. But if you just want like a nice artistic image, sometimes this can be really cool. That's a Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico. Another, go there in the wintertime and see the sandhill cranes and the snow geese, just absolutely bonkers how many birds are there at that time. And they're just a fun story. So we get out, you know, this particular trip, this is in the evening, but that morning we went out well before light, and it was 7 degrees when we went out. And these cranes, they all roost for the evening in the water. But it's shallow water, right? Because I mean, they need to be able to stand. So the water's only a couple inches deep. Well, it froze solid overnight. And so these cranes are standing in there and you start hearing like you start hearing the ice starting to crack, and finally like just having to break, the cranes are having to break the ice and they're flying off with these little ice rings around their legs. It's pretty neat. I mean, I'm sure that they do that, you know, a whole bunch. Silhouetting also, if you just change your position just a little bit. So these are opposite sides of the tree. You got kind of that nice cool mood on that side, on the left side, and then you have that warmer mood on the other side. These are Attitexana leafcutter ants, really interesting species from East Texas. A couple more deer examples. There will be more. But sometimes you get neat things where you get like a little bit of, they call rim light. So if you see kind of the whiskers on the bottom of that, the muzzle on that side, just a little hint of that light. And then that one, that was taken in harsh light. The one on the right, very harsh, but that buck was in the shadow of a big tree. And then the fall color behind it was kind of lit up. So sometimes you can make neat things happen. Dappled light. So, you know, generally as a photographer, if it's sunny out all day, I'm only photographing for a little bit morning and evening, unless I'm in the woods, because sometimes you get lucky in the woods. And this particular bear, he was in a really horrible spot, just really patchy light. But just a little bit further down slope from where he was the kind of this area of ferns and leaves and stuff and plants that was completely in the shade for the most part. And I just got lucky. I walked down there, got in there, and just a little bit of like, it almost gives the impression that he's in the understory of this big, huge forest. Even though you can't see the trees, you just got little kisses of light on him from sun peeking through the canopy. And he's not mad. He's eating, by the way. He's not mad or anything. And you can see some little tiny twigs sticking out from there, just munching away on all that stuff. Probably from here to the door, I would say. Understand your subject and observe its behavior. I mean, like I don't encourage people to do this. And if you're in, like this was in Smoky Mountains National Park, habituated bears, really used to humans, but you're not supposed to get with, I think, 100 yards of a bear. But sometimes they get within 100 yards of you, and there's just the way it is. And so, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with bears growing up, just being in bear country. And so never do anything you're not comfortable with, but if you watch their behavior, if you know, if he knows I'm there and he's moving in my direction and he's behaving naturally and not concerned with me and I'm not advancing, then I really don't feel that animal's a threat to me at that point. If he behaves differently or if he doesn't know I'm there, I'm going to make sure he knows I'm there first, and then if it's not behaving the way that I want it to behave, I'm out of there. Here's another example of dappled light, just kind of in the understories. Is a cuckoo. This is it's a roadrunner relative in Argentina. It super cool. They're much more. I mean, roadrunners can fly, obviously, but these guys fly and run, I would say, about equally. But they just look like little dinosaurs. They're crazy, crazy critters. Another deer, but here's just an example. Deep shade. That was like 10:30 a.m. I had this incredible encounter with this buck. I mean, there was a doe. It was height of the rut. He was tailing a doe, following around, basically waiting for her to be able to breed. They test. They frequently test, and the does they're the ones that basically give the green light, right? Like the bull elk and the bucks. They seem very aggressive and all that kind of stuff, but really they're not doing anything until the female decides that they can. And this guy was just trailing her, and I was just watching him run off other bucks. I mean, so close, but the light was awful. But he just got into this one spot where just basically his face got lit up. And then that's Verbena aemilia. I don't know the common name, but it's the sand verbena. That's the one that occurs in the sand, endemic to the sand sheet, South Texas. Super cool. And that was just, there was a mesquite tree on top of it. It was the middle of the day, and I was able to get some cool pics. So filtered light, this is probably my favorite kind of light. So filtered light is when like you have clouds in the sky, but they're not super thick clouds. So just a little hint of that sun's coming through, but it's not enough to create really nasty, harsh shadows. This is a longhorn bee on Helianthus angustifolia in East Texas. Really, I love this image. It just like makes me feel warm. And, you know, this is in the fall when these things are blooming. The bees are all going nuts. It's an American widgeon, same kind of thing. Like this is not full sun, not full cloud. It's kind of like right in between. Another deer, but it's that same kind of light. And then overcast, or I should say cloudy. Whenever there's the cloud over the sun, I really like that light too. And that lets you photograph pretty much all day. But here's something to consider too. Even when it's cloudy, always pay attention to where the sun is. Because if you're shooting in the direction of the sun, even if it's cloudy, the image will not look as nice as if you're shooting with the sun if the sun's behind you. Even when it's cloudy. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, but I always try to make sure the sun's behind me even when it's cloudy. But this is Lytris pycnostachya blooming in a super high quality longleaf pine savanna, Newton County, East Texas. It's private, so they get to burn late. So they burn when the fires probably came through there in the summertime. It just looks really great. Another spotted salamander. I just like the mood of that overcast light. Really even light, not shadows distracting you or anything like that. Two cool plants, Trifolium reflexum, buffalo clover. That's a Smith County, Texas. That's a native Texas clover. We don't have a whole lot of native clovers in Texas, but that's one of them. Probably the coolest one, buffalo clover, because supposedly they followed buffalo wallows and that's where they grew. And they do like to grow on the little edges of kind of moist, disturbed areas. Super cool. And then Hexaleptris grandiflora, maybe my favorite Texas wildflower. It's a non-photosynthesizing mycoheterotroph. They do have them in the Edwards Plateau. They're not common at all here, but they do pop up. But here in the Davis Mountains, they're fairly common if you go and look in the right places. And that's one that follows the monsoon rains. So July, August, best time to see those guys. But man, just a crazy electric pink, unreal that plant. And no leaves, so all you see is the pink flowers coming up. Yellow crowned night heron just kind of shows nice even light. Another deer in overcast light, but you can kind of see the difference of how the quality of light makes the animals look. And then before sunrise or after sunset, dawn or dusk, or some people call it the blue hour, you have to be willing to shoot at really high ISOs. You have to be willing to shoot really low shutter speeds oftentimes. Your image might not be super sharp, but man, it can look great. This is a bison. This is just American bison in a big vast prairie. You see that kind of the pink, that cotton candy pink and blue sky. Here's another one. This is Golden Club in the Florida Panhandle, taken after sunset. It's a bull elk bugling before the sun came up. It just feels cold, right? I mean, it was cold. Like if you look close, there's ice on his back and everything. But it feels cold, right? Sometimes you want an image to make you feel the way it was to be there. Flash, so using a supplemental light, you can never do it as good as nature has done it, but sometimes it's really necessary. So if you recognize these are pawpaw flowers, the Semina triloba. They dangle, like so they hang below the branches. And so if you were to look up into where the actual reproductive structures are, it's always shadowy, it's always dark. And if you try to take a picture to expose for that, so if you set your exposure to make those look bright, everything's going to just be white around it. So use a little bit of flash can pull out the detail in those areas that are typically hidden in shadow. This is a Southern Appalachian salamander. Salamanders really benefit from flash because all that color and all those patterns and everything that you see on them, when you use natural light, you just don't notice it because they're just, I don't know exactly what it is about them that the shadows just make them look less, I don't want to say lifeless, but it just does, you just can't do them justice without flash for whatever reason. That's a ringed salamander, super cool salamander, native to the interior highlands, the Ozarks and the Ouachitas. And then sometimes, so these are both examples of fill flash. And so what fill flash is you're still using natural light to help expose, and you're just adding like a little kiss of extra light to help bring out the shadows in your subject. So that's fill flash. It's not exposing the entire image. It's just helping get you to where you want to be with your exposure. But sometimes, like this Cope's gray tree frog, it's the middle of the night when these guys are out there calling. You need flash to light up the whole image. And you can make it look nice. Usually you use like a nice big soft light. And what that does is it spreads that light coming from the flash out into a bigger area. And so it kind of makes it look a little softer, a little less harsh. Here's another example. It's not a cane toad, it's a relative of the cane toad. From Argentina. I mean, this is one of the biggest amphibians I've ever seen. It didn't jump. It couldn't jump. It just walked. And but this has two different flash units. So when I said I had that transmitter, so I have a transmitter triggering two flash units that are trying to get even light throughout the whole scene to make it look like maybe it wasn't taken in the middle of the night. And then one other consideration is sometimes it's not as much about the light on the subject as it is the light elsewhere. So like this robin, the light was really hitting this fall foliage behind it. I just wanted to try to bring that out. And so the robin was just in the shade, which is fine, but there was actually light back there that I was really going for. And this is, northern shoveler. And the water here, same thing. The shoveler is in the pond, in the shade, but the light was reflecting the fall foliage on the leaves into the water. And so it made the water just look really, really cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about composing the shot. That's a dodecatheon or primula now. Shooting stars, that's same species that are pretty rare here up in the Fort Worth Prairie there in Cook County, way North Texas. But composing the shot, this one you see kind of a low angle, there's a rule of thirds, but to me, there's also kind of this rule of three, and I'll talk about that. Finding the angle is really important. And usually for wildlife, you want that angle to be as close to eye level with it with that organism as you can. If you would I don't have examples to compare, but taking an image standing from our height versus taking an image lower is a huge difference. For one, it helps separate the background from the animal further because your angle, you have a much further now as you're low between the animal and the background. So that can be nice and blurry. but it also just kind of brings you into its world. It feels more like you're observing it as you would, you know, if you were part of that world, other than just looking at it from a human's perspective. Another one kind of down in the grass, feeling more like you're in the animal's world a little bit. There's a smoother snake getting down on the snake's level. And this is snake, I mean, this is a snake that is about this long, right? So this is literally camera sitting on the ground. Louisiana water thrush down lands just above the water, and it kind of creates this magical effect where the background and the foreground it's kind of become one almost, except for that thin little strip of water in focus. And then low angle, so this cedar waxwing, this is taken on our street. So this is on asphalt. There are a few leaves, and all these waxwings are coming down to feed to get water from this little puddle here. But by getting low, like you don't see all the details of that asphalt. You see the leaves and that narrow strip of in focus area, and you just can't tell that there's like a curb and a bunch of pavement behind it. And then I really like the shot of this white trout lily just getting down like it's coming up through the leaves. These are a couple of examples of difficult plants. So, you know, Echinocereus Reichenbachia lace cactus. I always, whenever I photograph cactus, and I really like to photograph cactus, I want to make sure that the stigma is visible in the flowers, because that, for whatever reason, like the reproductive structures of plants are kind of what bring them to life for me. And so I want to make sure you can see that stigma. So if I get too low, then all those petals obscure it. And so you kind of want to find that angle where you can see that. And then that's Vases Trillium. That's a really, really hard plant to photograph. That's trillium that grows in a really small area, kind of in the southern Appalachians, because the flowers hang below, kind of like that pawpaw. And like you almost have to like lay down and shoot up on it. So you just kind of find just the right one to get that angle where you can actually get the background to look nice and all of that. But sometimes I like a good top-down shot too, because the Sabata salamanders, if you get on their level, you get all their personality, but you don't get to see all those cool patterns and stuff. So I really like top-downs for salamanders, Louisiana pine snake. And then butterflies, a lot of like a swallowtail, looking at him sitting with his, you know, her sitting with her wings folded up, still cool. But I really want to see like those open wings to get that dorsal view with all that really, really pretty coloration. So being able to be patient and wait till she gives that perfect angle. And then balancing the image, you know, there's a lot of things to think about. A lot of times we think of balance of having equal parts here and there, but sometimes for me, negative space can be balancing for an image because it gives that animal, especially if they have a pose where it's almost looking, it gives that animal a world to go into, like it's looking into its world. So some people don't like a lot of negative space in images, and I respect that, but I really like negative space. Like this pronghorn here, you can see he's really far over on one side of the image. There's a lot of negative space, but this guy lives, I mean, this is in one of those Bureau of Land Management prairies out in New Mexico where there's just hundreds of thousands of acres of shortgrass prairie. He's got an expansive world. And so I want to kind of show that with that image. Another example with this deer here in some tallgrass prairie, right? Just to kind of see, he's got this sea of prairie and he's just this little part of it. Here's another example. So here you can balance the image by having actually two parts that balance each other out. These are short-horned lizards, greater short-horned lizards or mountain short-horned lizards from West Texas. One of our 3 native horned lizards or horny toads. But you got 2 in there. This one's just cool because it's hard to see at first. But you can see there's 2 of them kind of balancing each other out. Here's a Yanalasi salamander, crazy cool. These get like 9 to 10 inches long. Salamander in the Appalachians. You have the salamander, but then you kind of have some foliage kind of balancing out the other side of that image. Pygmy nuthatch from Colorado, same sort of thing. You have some of those grasses coming in at the bottom and on the side of frame opposite the bird. And then sometimes it's just fun composing a landscape shot. This is mayapple and groundsel, golden groundsel. In a rich woodland in East Texas, and just kind of having the mayaples kind of make a pattern and balance out having trees in the foreground, the background, just helps balance it out. And then, like I said, rules of 3, like for some reason to me, like having actually 3 things in an image just takes it up a notch. I don't know why. but here's, you know, 3 young pronghorn bucks. Here you have 3 images, 3. So the blooms are kind of the rule of 3 here, and it follows a diagonal across the image. This is a queen, Bombus impatiens. Bombus impatiens is common eastern, what? Eastern bumblebee, yeah. So it's on Rudbeckia laciniata. I'm going down a million rabbit holes, but Rudbeckia laciniata is known from one location in Texas, widespread in the western U.S., Appalachians. There's one spot in Jasper County, and we got seed from it, put it in our garden, pollinator magnet. But anyway, you can see kind of the 3 going down there. Background and foreground, that's you know, that can play a really big part in composing your image. This is just telling a story, right? You have this buck and he's making a run at this doe to try to test her, and she's standing there kind of like not feeling it. That dude only had one eye too. I don't know, you can't really see it, but prairie warbler, basically using pine. So these guys, and pretty common breeder in East Texas. Okay. Okay. But these guys breed in like young regenerating pine stands is where they're most common in East Texas. Probably more common now than they ever were. I bet historically they probably bred where, like, you know, a tree or a hurricane created some kind of disturbance where they could come in. Now with these early successional pine forests, these guys are fairly common. Lunamop, one of the prettiest animals in the country. I mean, it's hard to, if you've seen these big, gorgeous moths, but kind of looking through some foreground foliage, looking through some trees, kind of putting you in that world. And then same kind of here, you see the foreground, it kind of almost is like it's just appearing out of the foreground in the background. If you can get those situations, I think it's really effective. Background, so having a nice, perfectly unicolored black background is all well and good, but I like a little more texture and color usually. So that's a big Sphaistra patulca. It's one of the longhorn bees, big female on Gaillardia estivalis, but I use some of the other Gaillardia flowers in the background to just kind of create that nice color, kind of almost forming a little circle around it. Then that's Calopogon tuberosus, grass pink orchid, East Texas, using kind of the ferns to show where it lives, right? It lives in these like seepy areas. And so you have some fern foreground, fern background, and you have that nice dark background in the Asclepias perennis image there. Sometimes that black background can really make a white flower pop too. And that's a Nelson's sharp-tailed sparrow, or just a Nelson sparrow now, I think they call them. But using that really grassy place that they live to sort of set the scene for it. And then I just had this in there because if you read photography books or you listen to photography tutorials, they always talk about rules of thirds. If you're photographing birds, you want the bird looking at you. But like sometimes just go with it. If it looks good, just take the picture. And this, I just kind of like it. It's almost like it doesn't care about me at all, right? Like it's doing its own thing. It's looking off into this distant, really pretty sky as if I'm not even there. And I kind of like that. Same with this. Yeah, yeah. I get very muddy in these situations. And Dick Sissel, same kind of thing. It doesn't care about me. It's doing its own thing. Plus you have the rubus foreground. It's on an old rubus stem. And then here's another prairie warbler. And the rule that's broken here is that I said eye level before, and I'm actually shooting up at this guy, but just with the tops of those little young pine trees, it just created a composition that I think overcame that shortcoming of not having that perfect angle. All right, home stretch here, real quick, just some technical stuff to think about. And so this is one that kind of shows it all. That's a hummingbird, a ruby-throated hummingbird feeding on Lonicera sempervirens. Oh boy. But depth of field, real shallow, so I can really blur out the background. Sharp focus, get it on the bird, even though the bird's flying, and then having a really high shutter speed to try to freeze those wings. So focus, this is a herder spadefoot toad. Eyes, usually you want to get the eyes shut. He looks like he's seen some things. But get the eyes in nice focus. Here's a mason bee, osmia. if the eyes are in focus, if all the other stuff's not in focus, to me, it's not that big of a deal. And like I said before with plants, I really try to focus on the reproductive structures of plants. Like I want that to be where the eye goes to. And so you have a Trillium viridescens, one of our 5 Trillium species in Texas there. And then one of the Tradescantia hirsutiflora, I think. But I tried to focus on those reproductive structures. And then depth of field, just trying to, this image shows isolating 1 or 2 of the flowers and having everything else kind of just make these little out of focus balls and things like that. Here's another example. This is false anemone. Jumping in on one flower, everything else out of focus around it. This is another Sphaster bee on Silphium. It's a male, but trying to get the focus on the bee to really pull you into that bee, but have everything else nice and blurry so you can really focus there. Long-tailed skipper, I was so excited about this shot because I'd never get them to sit with their wings open. And it was just nectaring on that Helianthus angustifolia. And I mean, they look like completely different animals. Like if you see them with their wings open versus closed, so cool. Now salamander, so this is a eastern tiger salamander, another crazy cool animal. But I wanted to show a lot more and focus on him, so I bumped up my aperture. So if you ever heard aperture, your lower number of apertures it means it's a wider opening on the whole. That means less of the image is in focus. So it's really great if you want to isolate your subject, like just get one thing in focus and the rest blurry. But a higher number makes the aperture, the opening in the camera smaller, and that gets more in focus. And so I went to a higher number for this one, just because I wanted to get more of those leaves and the body of the salamander in focus. Same with when you're taking a landscape shot. So this is more Lytris eupatorium in a really nice longleaf pine forest, but I wanted to get as many of those flowers in focus as I could, so I bumped that aperture number up much higher. Shutter speed. So here's another American avocet. By having a really fast shutter speed, you really freeze the motion. So I was able to freeze that little water trickle coming out. Same with this white line sphinx. These guys, you've probably seen these guys flying around. Those wings are beating incredibly fast. I think I had 1/4,000th of a second to be able to capture that. But sometimes it's kind of cool if you go slower too, because you can see a little bit of motion in the wings, like that brown pelican. You try to get the head and the eye as sharp as you can, but a little bit more motion to really show you that it's moving. And of course, photographing waterfalls. This is one of a handful of waterfalls that are found along the Kisatchie Wold in East Texas that are really just great places to be. Now it's kind of just bringing it together to tell a story. So we already talked a little bit about the spotted salamander that comes out, only those certain time of years. Well, they pop up from the ground under the leaf litter. So I found this guy under a log. He was just covered in dirt. So I could just kind of clean him off, put him and tried to set up a situation that completely fabricated. I mean, 100% fabricated, but it tells a story and it makes an interesting image. And my thought is if it sparks somebody's interest in the species more than like, he's just sitting there like that with dirt all over him under the log, probably not going to get people too excited. But if you can capture behavior, that's always like, if you capture wildlife behavior, that's like the pinnacle. So these royal terns and some courtship behaviors where the males are bringing fish to the females. Tender moments, an older fawn and a doe. It's always nice. So that's the Mother's Day picture, and the Father's Day is so I don't know. This was peak of rut, and you have a mature bull. I mean, a buck, like a breeding age buck. And there's another buck that's just, a little spike buck that he's not a threat. He's not competing in the rut. And this larger buck came over and was just really, really gentle and tender with him. Like they play sparred. They had a couple of this contact. And so that makes me wonder, like, if there's something deeper going on. Like, could it be a brother? Could it be a father? Could it be his father? Like, maybe, I don't, who knows? But for some reason, they were just being very affectionate with each other. These ones, not so much. But sometimes if you tell a story, like if I were to say technically, like this isn't my greatest shot, right? Like the light's not that great, all that kind of stuff. But you have 2 big bulls fighting. You got fall color in the background. You have another bull that's got broken antlers, bugling in the background. Then you have the 2 cows that are like whatever, like they let these idiots do whatever they're doing, So it just kind of tells the story of the rut all in one image. And then another example of how lighting, a story can overcome lighting. This is kind of what I was saying. It was overcast, but I was shooting towards the sun. So the light, I don't love the light on this image, but man, sometimes you just capture that perfect moment. These guys have been going at it for about a minute and a half, broke off, and this one was just kind of raking at the flanks of the other one. Just really cool to see. And then this image is, I don't know, behavior predation, but just super cool, right? Because that's that jagged ambush bug in the middle, little Lasioglossum sweatbee. I just love it because you can look at this image for a while and see lots of different things. It just tells the story of, this is on a goldenrod, one flower, but there's like countless life and death events, like just all this crazy stuff going on in this one little flower. You walk past it and you're like, yeah, it's another goldenrod, whatever. But there's like just this saga that's unfolding between these species. It's literally life and death. Another predation. It's a little hard to see that it's got the whiptail's got a scorpion in its mouth there. I really wanted a shot that would have shown the tail, but sometimes you take what you can get. This guy was working that scorpion for probably about 30 seconds, just trying to do like little strike, hit and run, hit and run. Sometimes it's like the moment right before the predation that really like builds the suspense. It's another common eastern bumblebee has no idea that Carolina mantis is sitting there, and she did strike. So that's a female mantis, did strike, but missed. But like below this was actually on my buddy's, on his patio in a potted plant. That mantis showed up on its own, bee showed up on its own, but like on the concrete of the patio, there were like husks of all these bees that she'd just been chowing down on. But like the trout lily there, I tried to use some of the foreground and background to show how these guys, they literally just like push up through the leaf litter in the spring. And they just appear like out of nothing. And sometimes you'll actually see, it's kind of cool, like they'll pierce a leaf. So like they'll be coming up and there'll be like a leaf surrounding them that they just pierce the leaf as they came up.
Oh my God.
And then I don't think this was just luck on my part. Like, I think that's probably a defensive posture by the ant in the back. Like sometimes they'll kind of do that. They'll open their jaws, but it almost looks like it's like, well, I got you. Like, I got your back. So the story I'm telling there is maybe not the most truthful of stories, but it's fun. A longleaf pine cone in a burned longleaf pine savanna. It just tells a little bit about the life history of the species. The cones it's not a serotinous cone that requires fire to open, but the community itself needs fire. Clapper rail, if you're a birder, rails are these really secretive birds that live in the marsh. This just kind of shows, often you hear them, but you don't see them, and sometimes you just get a little glimpse of them as they're sneaking past. And then here's a good story to tell. I shouldn't say everybody. Lots of people don't like snakes. Right? Snakes, for whatever reason, they're malign, they're misunderstood. They need good press, right? So sometimes people take a picture of a rattlesnake like hunched up, rattling his tail, looking like it's about ready to bite somebody, but that's not how they live their lives, right? They just go about their day trying to survive, trying to eat, trying to be safe. And so this is a timber or canebrake rattlesnake from East Texas, just looking like he's just out there hanging out. And so sometimes I think that's just trying to capture a moment and from a safe distance. Okay. I think I've got maybe 4 or 5 slides left, so I'm going to burn through them. Take advantage of rare opportunities. So Winter Storm Uri came through 2021. It was a bad situation for a lot of people and a lot of animals. But for me, actually, I grew up suburbs of Chicago. I'm used to snowing winters. And to get down here, you just don't get that. And we actually had 6 inches of snow, and we had fox sparrows, pretty hard to see in East Texas. They're there in the winter. We had dozens of fox sparrows that came into our yard. And all I had to do, I just went out there with a white sheet, laid in the snow, and they were just bouncing all around me. And then I'll show you, the last slide has another picture from that. That was just really cool. Time and in the field, so getting out as much as you can, and patience are the key if there's something you want to photograph. Now this is an American bird grasshopper. Like, probably doesn't seem like, just dying to photograph one, but these guys are really cool. And I see them all the time, but you can never get close to them. Like, they're just off. And for whatever reason, this day, this one just sat on that little blue stem, and I literally let me hold the blue stem to get the right angle. Sometimes you just have those little serendipitous experiences. It's like something that you've been chasing in the back of your mind for so long. This is another one. This is a red-breasted merganser, a really cool bird. You know, super hard to get close to, but one day I had this one. This was at Texas Point National Wildlife Refuge. Like, I got into the water there with it in February, and it just let me like walk on through the water on my knees alongside it as it went diving, foraging, and all that. So with enough time and enough patience, cool things happen. Thanks, that's the other one. So that was Winter Storm Uri, one of the coolest photo opportunities in my life. These otters were just playing on that snowy log and just right by our house. Just super cool thing. If you have Instagram, Naturalist Journey on Instagram, I have a natural history blog that I neglect pretty severely. I used to post pretty regularly on it, but it's been a while. And then Flickr, that's probably my favorite platform for looking at images because I can post large format images there. There's no limit on the text I can put. So whenever I get, you know, time to write a little natural history vignette, I do it. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I know that went long, so I don't know if there's some questions.
When you're photographing because the river is really pretty and sometimes it's really still and being able to do the reflection. Is there recommendations about speed or lighting or I don't know, what would your recommendation be when? So if
it's really still, then shutter speed doesn't really matter. Like because your shutter speed is you either want to freeze it or slow it down to make it look kind of that milky look. But if it's really slow, you can go to high shutter speed. But usually for those reflections, play around with the angle because it's counterintuitive, but sometimes even as you get really low down, then they can really make the reflection pop too. But yeah, I think your light really early or really late is best when you don't have a lot of like white sky reflected on the water itself would probably be the best time to do it, early or late.
How true is it to your own vision? Like if you see it and you go, that's awesome. And then you take a picture and it's not so awesome.
So yeah. The other thing I recommend using is a polarizing filter. You turn them. So in that case, like you don't want it fully polarized because then it's gonna cut because that reflection is glare basically.
Right.
But if you do it partially, you can sometimes get it to where it'll look true because our eye is filtering out like that bright spot in the water. Like we're not really seeing that. Like we have so much such the ability to like tone down hot spots, brighten up shadows, the human eye. The camera doesn't, but that polarizing filter can help. So I mean, look into that and then you just play around with the angle on that. And then I would say from about knee high to your height, you probably can capture it pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very good.
Chicago,
Right.
What's that?
No, I'm.
Okay.
You're not good, right? Blackberry. Big focus.
I look good.
Focus, thanks.